Xbox Series X is here, and I've been setting it up, exploring its UI, and testing out all manner of games, and I have thoughts. The Xbox Series X will be hitting the shelves, and your doormats, very soon indeed, and Microsoft has touted it as the, and I quote, fastest, most powerful games console ever, end quote. During my time with the console, I found that there's no denying that it ramps up games to their full potential, even ones as old as Fable 3, and gives them one hell of a facelift. But the overall wow factor for Microsoft's next-gen console does feel lacking in terms of the UI, personalisation, and minor aspects of the new Xbox Series X controller. And remember, we've got months to wait before the Xbox Series X has any exclusives like Halo Infinite, Fable, Stalker 2, State of Decay 3, and more. We're in limbo while we wait for pure next-gen games to actually arrive on the Xbox Series X. For now, I've mainly been putting Game Pass games through their paces, for a lack of any Series X exclusives. I've split this review into 7 sections: setup, UI and personalisation, remote features, the controller, the games, the appearance of the Xbox Series X, and finally, our verdict. I'll be tackling each part as we go, so let's kick things off, shall we? Here's our review of the Xbox Series X. I cannot overstate how easy the setup of the Xbox Series X is, courtesy of the Xbox app, which you can download to your phone. Seriously, this was about as easy as saying insert idiom here about how easy it was instead of coming up with one yourself. Look, it's been a long couple of weeks, don't at me. After putting in the code you see on your TV screen, from the app you sign in, set up the internet, and choose power settings for the Xbox Series X, among other things. Honestly, bypassing the faff of typing things in using the Xbox TV keyboard and using your touchscreen phone keyboard instead is enough to make downloading the Xbox app worth it. Importing your settings from your old console means that you're ready to go in a matter of minutes, though I did have to undergo an obligatory update to the Xbox Series X that was about 800 megabytes in size, and an update to the controller too, which was smaller but took a couple of minutes. All in all, I was ready and playing the Series X in under half an hour, if that. Considering you're probably going to be as impatient as I am to get hands-on with Series X or S when it arrives at your door, having a swift setup is crucial to making sure you don't get fatigued or frustrated at the first hurdle. So the convenience of using the Xbox app is mighty appreciated. However, upon booting up my Xbox Series X for the 3rd time, it automatically prompted me to change my Xbox settings to take advantage of my 4K TV. Consider me bamboozled as to why this happened the 3rd time I booted up the Series X instead of the 1st or 2nd time. As a heads up, it is possible to calibrate your TV manually instead of waiting for the Series X to prompt you to do it. As another minor gripe, to play without an internet connection, you'll need to assign the Series X as your home console, which the console only told me when I unplugged the Ethernet cable. It was a minor pain, but it was one that was quickly fixed. On to UI and personalisation. When it came to seeing the Xbox Series X dashboard for the first time, I won't lie to you, I was slightly underwhelmed. Its UI is a mix of good news and bad news depending on how you look at it. For owners of the Xbox One generation of consoles, the good news is that the Xbox Series X UI is very similar to the Xbox One, so you don't have to relearn where everything is and you'll be able to find all your games, collections, and friends easily. The bad news is that the Xbox Series X UI is very similar to the Xbox One. To match the new, undeniably powerful console, I was expecting a revamped UI design, one that puts your games front and center and keeps entertainment apps, the Microsoft Store, your avatar, and console settings in their own distinct sections so they don't clutter up your home screen. It takes a little while to get used to the Xbox UI if you've not owned an Xbox console since the 360, and that's not a major issue, but I won't deny that seeing the same layout as on my Xbox One deflated me a bit. For a new generation, I was expecting, and I think most of you were expecting this too, a redesigned new UI layout. Something to make you feel like, yes, this is the most powerful games console ever. This feels like a new start from Microsoft and the Xbox. But it's largely similar to the familiar Xbox One UI. I'm just surprised there's not a bit more panache. What can I say? Your girl loves panache. Personalisation also leaves something to be desired. Like with the Xbox One X and Xbox One, you can change the colour of the UI in the Xbox Series X, with the added option to have a dynamic Xbox Series X theme that gently flows behind your active apps and games on the home screen. Like with the theme, you can change the colour of these ribbons, and I was hoping I could download more dynamic themes from the store, but alas, I could find no such place to do such a thing. In the future, I'm expecting there to be many more options for dynamic themes on the Series X, as custom moving themes are a fun way to personalise your Xbox, and on a simple level, it's a bit of panache to show off all the pretty graphics the Xbox Series X can do. And you know how I feel about panache. Returning to the app, the Xbox Series X has remote features available via the app too, which lets you play games remotely on your phone using a Bluetooth controller, install games to your Xbox Series X from your phone, and turn on and control the console. To use remote play, you'll need a Bluetooth connection to your Xbox Series X controller, and for your Xbox Series X and your phone to be connected to the internet for it to work. Remote play is already available on the Xbox One, but I wanted to see what it could do, so I took it for a test drive on the Xbox Series X. This is me playing Hollow Knight on my phone, so you can see that remote play works fairly well as long as you have a stable internet connection. Admittedly, it took a little while to set up the controller via Bluetooth. You press the button at the top of the controller to enter pairing mode, but once it was connected, I was impressed by how responsive the controls were. However, upon disconnecting the controller from my phone, I couldn't link it back to the Series X with Bluetooth no matter how hard I tried, which was a pain. Connecting it to the Series X manually using a cable seemed to be the only option, but because I'm lazy as hell, I decided instead of moving 6 feet to do so, I'd turn the console off using the remote control function. Remote control on your phone does exactly what it says on the tin. Using a basic interface with swiping your screen in lieu of moving around using an analog stick, it lets you remotely control the Xbox Series X. Not without a bit of difficulty though. I tried swiping through the menu using my phone controls and found it didn't respond to my swipes, even though I tried little flicks and big scrolls and everything in between. When I finally got to the option to turn the console off, there's a shortcut on the remote control section of the app, but I wanted to test if I could get to it manually, I couldn't select the turn console off button. By the end, I won't lie, I was pretty frustrated with the whole endeavour and was forced to leave my comfy sofa to turn off the Xbox Series X. Moving that 6 feet was such a struggle. Don't judge me. Speaking of the Xbox Series X controller, aside from the issues reconnecting it to the Xbox Series X itself, I really like it. When you unveil your Xbox Series X, the controller comes with batteries, which is a nice touch, and the feel of the thing is exquisite. With a new grid-like matte texture on the back of the controller, you feel in complete control of it, unlike the less matte texture of the Xbox One controller, which could get slippery after long playing sessions. Like I mentioned in my preview, the new D-pad is brilliant as its design lets you quickly know which direction to press as soon as your thumb is in the middle, without having to look down and double-check the direction, like with the old Xbox One controller. It's also in matte instead of shiny plastic, making it feel less grimy after multiple play sessions and, to my eyes, overall it looks sleeker. The triggers, analog sticks and bumper buttons have a pleasant amount of resistance, with the analog sticks and bumper buttons themselves feeling like they go in further when you press them. A small change, I know, yet it feels more receptive than the shallower button presses on the Xbox One controller. Deep in the bowels of the Xbox Series X, you can fiddle with the settings to your controller. There's not quite enough depth in comparison to other next-gen controllers. You can't alter the resistance of the triggers or anything, for example. Yet there's a fair amount you can customize through the Xbox Series X to optimize your controller. As well as remapping buttons, there's also the option to create multiple profiles, which you can then switch between. So you can have one with the vibration turned off, and another with inverted controls, if that's your thing. It saves you having to change the controller settings in every single game you play, so it's pretty much a decent time saver. One small hurdle you might find yourself tackling is that the buttons on the Xbox Series X controller respond best to firm presses rather than taps, which takes the briefest of moments to get used to, but is worth mentioning all the same. On to the big boy. How games fare on the Xbox Series X. Updates and software aside, you're left with about 800 gigabytes of storage to play with on the 1TB Xbox Series X, which is plenty of space for piles of games. As for how they look, all I have to say is, wow, seriously, wow. The improvements that the Xbox Series X makes to the games I played is staggering, especially Gears of War 5, which was crystal clear, saturated in colour and as smooth as the proverbial baby's bottom. Due to the lack of launch games, the Xbox Series X, like I said in my preview, is basically a Games Pass machine, and it really does make the games you play on it look utterly beautiful. I really can't find fault with it at all. Fable 3 looks as smooth as I've ever seen it, and considering it came out on the 360 a decade ago, that's pretty goddamn impressive. Quick Resume is a revelation, and I can't understate how often I used it during my time with the Xbox Series X. I switched from Spiritfarer to Hollow Knight, to Gears of War 5 when I died a little too often in Hollow Knight, to Doom Eternal because I wanted to make other things die instead of dying myself. Quick Resume makes a huge amount of difference if you're in a non-committal mood, and look, I'm trying so hard not to compare it to modern flame-related dating apps, I promise. It's going to be hard going back to the now old generation of consoles and not have Quick Resume at your fingertips, as well as the longer loading times. Because yes, the loading times on the Xbox Series X are truly astonishing. Even when I turned on the Xbox Series X after a night of it being powered off, Quick Resume was there, putting me back exactly where I ended my last session of Hollow Knight as if I'd only been gone a few minutes. Considering all Microsoft has done to make its games look so goddamn beautiful on the Series X, it's frustrating that capture is still limited to 1 minute, unlike the PS4, which allows you to capture for 15 minutes if you wish. Mind you, with a 1 minute limit, social media is obviously at the heart of the share button on the Xbox Series X, as rarely do you want to upload a long meandering clip to Twitter or the like, unless you're playing an outstanding walking sim. Microsoft wants people to show off their Xbox Series X gameplay, and honestly, I don't blame them one bit, because with the console's capability, there's plenty to be bragging about. Finally, good God, I love the appearance of the Xbox Series X. You've all seen my adoring B-roll of the console by now. It's brutalism at its finest. This obelisk fits snugly into my TV unit when turned horizontally, or stands up tall beside it, never drawing my eye too much because despite its size, its design is discreet enough that it will go with pretty much anything. The Series X itself is whisper quiet too. With my TV on mute, I couldn't hear a thing. This appearance section is rather short because honestly, there's no other way I can say how much I enjoy the design of the Series X. And with that, it's time to wrap up our Xbox Series X review. So, here's our verdict. The Series X itself is a console that beefs up your games to an unprecedented degree, but the lack of launch exclusives is disappointing. If you have a big pile of shame that you're trying to work your way through and some spare cash, the Xbox Series X is worth buying because it does make games look absolutely breathtaking. For those of you who are waiting for truly next-gen games like Halo Infinite and Fable, you can probably guess what I'm gonna say next. I don't think you're missing out on much if you sit and wait for those exclusives to hit the shelves before you get your very own Xbox Series X. And that's our Xbox Series X review. If you enjoyed the video, thanks very much, and don't forget to subscribe to Eurogamer as we're gonna have a ton more coverage of the Xbox Series X, and especially the Fable reboot when it comes out, courtesy of yours truly, because I'm just a little obsessed. Just a little. Until then, we have a new video out every single day, so there's always something to watch. Now, if you'll excuse me, I'm gonna go return to Hollow Knight and finally kill the damn False Knight. So, I'll see you next time.